Hey everyone, welcome back to The Tent, your place for politics, policy, and progress. I'm Colin Seeberger, your host. There's been a flurry of diplomatic activity over the course of the past few days over Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. As our listeners well know, it's been nearly 3.5 years since Russia launched its bloody and brutal war in Ukraine. Earlier this year, experts projected that nearly 1 million people had lost their lives since the start of the war in 2022. Donald Trump famously promised to end this bitter war in the first 24 hours of his presidency, and yet here we are, to no avail. But in recent days, he's met with both Russian President Vladimir Putin as well as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, along with a slew of other European heads of state. So we wanted to discuss where the war in Ukraine really stands. What are Putin's motivations in joining these talks right now? Does he want a peace deal to appease President Trump like he said earlier this week? Or is Trump getting played by the former KGB agent once again? And what would durable peace in Ukraine really look like? Joining me to break it all down is the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, William Taylor. We were thrilled to have him on the show this week. He is brilliant. He knows so much about the region. He knows so much about the players. Really nobody who's better to talk about what actually has happened over the course of the past week, as well as what the future of Ukraine really may look like. So I hope you enjoyed the conversation just as much as I did, and stick around after the interview for a moment of joy, because I am fresh back from vacation. I have some exciting news to share about what happened on my trip, and we also have some important Taylor Swift news to discuss. Ambassador William Taylor is a distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Prior to joining the Atlantic Council, Ambassador Taylor was Vice President of the Europe and Russia portfolio at the U.S. Institute of Peace. From 2006 to 2009, he served as the U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine. He also served as the Chargé d'Affaires at the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv from 2019 to 2020. Ambassador Taylor, thanks so much for joining us on The Tent.
Colin, it's delightful to be here.
Well, we are really excited to talk with you this week because there's been a lot of action that's been happening centered on the Russian-Ukrainian conflict over the course of the past week. And there's a ton to break down. But before we dive into the latest, I wanted to ask you to give our listeners some insights into Vladimir Putin's motivations with this conflict. What is it that is really kind of back of mind for him as he thinks about why did he even engage in this war, as well as, what is going into his calculus as he weighs lots of outreach trying to bring this thing to a close?
Well, first of all, Colin, he's not trying to bring this thing to a close. Let's be clear. And you're right to ask, what's his motivation? And it's not back of mind. It's front of mind. He's been explicit. He's been very clear about what he wants, and it is domination of Ukraine. He wants to eliminate Ukraine as a sovereign nation. He doesn't think that Ukraine or Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian society exists. He doesn't think it's there. And so he wants to just incorporate it back into Russia, reestablish the Soviet Union, the Russian Empire. And I'm not, this is out there. He's written this.
Yeah.
He's not only said this over and over, recently as well. He's also written it down. He's distributed it to his soldiers.
Yeah.
He wants to eliminate Ukraine, front of mind.
Well, we've seen Putin ignore a ceasefire plan put forward by the United States in March of this year. We saw him ignore a kind of best final offer from President Trump in April that included recognizing Russian control of Crimea, as well as recognizing de facto occupation of multiple regions of Ukraine by Russia. And we also saw Russia ignore an invitation to a summit in May of this year in Istanbul, trying to negotiate a peace deal. It just seems that there's so much outreach that's being done to Putin by the United States, and every single time he seems to just be completely ignoring what this administration is putting forward. Do you see any real motivation by Putin to reach a peace deal?
No, let's be clear. No. I can answer that question right now. No, no motivation. He wants to batter Ukraine until they submit.
Well, what do you think that says then about President Trump's ability to influence these negotiations?
Only if President Trump uses the leverage that he's got. And he's got leverage. Let's be clear. The United States has leverage over Putin, over Russia. Russia's not strong. Russia is not strong. Russia's not even winning in Ukraine. It is holding its own. It's gradually taking a little bit of territory this day, that day, this week, that week. It's been trying to do that for 2 years. 3 years, the first year of this war, for 3.5 years now, of course. It's 1,272 days that the Ukrainians, this time, I mean, they started, of course, defending the Ukrainians started themselves in 2014. But on the big, it's 1,272 days. And they've held them off. The Ukrainians first, as you know, pushed them all the way back to where they are now. 2 years ago, the Russians occupied 18% of Ukrainian territory. Today, 2 years later, 19%. Yeah, 1% over the last 2 years. And they're grinding through soldiers. So they're not winning. And so the United States has leverage. The United States has a lot of economic leverage, political leverage that President Trump can use, as well as military. We can continue to provide weapons to the Ukrainians to keep them going. One last thing, Colin, before we go back to your question. I don't think it is true that the United States made that offer that you described kind of in the middle of your question. That is to give them. We didn't offer Ukrainian territory. It's not ours to give, and I don't think we actually did. There were reports. You're right that there were reports that maybe Steve Witkoff or something had some conversations with the Russians, and he brought some ideas back from the Russians. But they were never endorsed. That was not, as far as I know, U.S. policy. So just to be clear. But going back to your main question, what can be done to push Putin to the table? Use the leverage. He is vulnerable to that leverage.
Yeah, just to that end, I'm curious to get your take on, we are multiple years into this conflict. We've talked about Russia suffered a lot of losses on the battlefield, economically, seems to be kind of on its heels. Where do things stand domestically for Russia? Where is Putin's position looking like politically? How are people kind of responding to this conflict internally within Russia? And is that having any impact on, how Russia is approaching conversations around peace negotiations?
Again, short answer, no. The Russian regime, the Kremlin, has such dominance over Russian society, over Russian media, over Russian messages, that the Russian people, they hear this over and over and over, that they're winning, that there are Nazis down there in Kyiv, that Ukraine threatens Russia, that NATO wants to come into Ukraine and attack Russia. It's craziness. But that's what the Russian people hear. And the Russian people, other than the million families who have either lost or are visiting their sons and daughters in hospitals, a million casualties, those families, they're feeling it, and they kind of know about it. But the majority of Russians, they listen to what the Kremlin says.
Well, you mentioned, Russia is, all things considered, not a, dominant economic superpower.
To say the least.
Yeah, and yet, the United States is refusing to use its leverage to bring this conflict to a close. How do you think other countries who may be more economically dominant are watching from the sidelines how the United States is involving itself in this ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine? And what do you think, what is the message that is being sent to them, thinking namely China, about, how China decides to conduct its own foreign affairs?
China's watching closely. President Xi is watching very closely how well, how fully, how supportive we are to the Ukrainians. as an indicator of how supportive we would be to the Taiwanese. The Chinese are watching very carefully. The Chinese are probably watching also that what President Trump has done in terms of sanctions, tariffs, secondary tariffs. President Trump talked about putting secondary tariffs on purchasers, the nations that do a lot of buying, who buy a lot of Russian oil. Mm-hmm. And Financial Times done an analysis. It's either India or China. They vie for who buys the most Russian oil, but they're both, in the 40% of Russian oil is to India, and 40% to China. And Trump put tariffs, like 50% tariffs on exports of Indian goods to the United States because they're buying Russian oil. The Chinese noticed that. Chinese noticed that. They have, the United States has not put those tariffs on them yet, but they noticed. I tell you who else noticed that, and that's Putin. Putin noticed that Trump actually took a step.
Yeah, did the right thing.
Actually did the right thing. Actually did the right thing, and India is responding, panicking a bit, not sure if they should stand up and continue to buy Russian oil. What's what the government says, but there are a lot of traders who are looking for other sources of oil. Putin noticed, and Putin at that point asked for this meeting in Anchorage last week. I think that finally President Trump took a step, and that spooked Putin. But going back to your question about China, they're watching too. They want to see how firm our commitment is to allies.
Well, I am, speaking of this Anchorage summit, I'd say it's more like a surrender summit, personally. But I am curious to get your take on, what's come out of it. There was obviously the Zelensky meeting happening at the White House earlier this week as well, and yet we saw Russia has launched new strikes against women, children, and civilians in Ukraine. Do you think that, we're any closer to a peace deal? What progress, if any, has been made over the course of the past week? I guess maybe a better way to rephrase that, because it seems to me that the U.S. just sacrificed its moral clarity by inviting Vladimir Putin to come to the United States, literally rolling out a red carpet for him, and yet seems to have gotten nothing in return. Is that a misread?
No, it's not a misread. That's what happened in Anchorage. But you asked about what happened over the last week. And a more interesting summit discussion was this past Monday, when these European leaders, including President Zelensky, came to the White House, had a very good meeting. I think they made some real progress. And in that regard, I think we are closer. I mean, that was a step forward in a couple of ways. One was the Europeans, and again, including Zelensky, united, really strongly united. I mean, here they came with no notice. They showed up. They were on message. They had coordinated beforehand among the Europeans and Zelensky, and they came into that meeting in the White House with clarity and unity. And they counteracted some of the mistakes, frankly, or some of the concerns that came out of Anchorage. They were, part of the reasons that they were there so quickly was to repair the damage and reorient the Americans, in particular President Trump, on, for example, a ceasefire. President Trump goes into Anchorage strongly in favor of a ceasefire.
Yeah, he telegraphed that was his big goal.
Big goal, and it was a big goal as agreed with the Europeans the 2 days before. So a week ago today. So that was really quick. A week ago today, last Wednesday, the Europeans, including Zelensky, and President Trump, got on the phone and talked about getting ready for Anchorage. And they agreed. Ceasefire. We need to put a ceasefire. And they also agreed that if Putin doesn't come to the table, going back to what we said earlier, we, the West, supporters of Ukraine, need to put sanctions
Have to respond.
And if Putin doesn't agree to the ceasefire,
yes,
then you do something. You take steps. You bring out the sticks. And so President Trump even on his way into Anchorage, was strong on the ceasefire. Well, something happened. Something happened in that meeting, and he came back and he started talking about, well, maybe we don't need a ceasefire.
If you're in the presidential limo, you don't know what's going to happen when you're one-on-one with Vladimir Putin.
Even if you did it on 3-on-3. There
or
was
on Signal.
They've done that too. But somewhere in that in those sets of meetings, Trump changed his mind. And he came back saying, well, maybe we don't. I haven't needed to use ceasefires and these other things that I have solved, so maybe we don't need a ceasefire. Europeans and Zelensky heard this, and they said, we need a ceasefire. And so they came. They came on Monday. And publicly, in the public session before they went into the private session, two of the European leaders were very clear, explicit about a ceasefire. The German chancellor said, we need a ceasefire. The President Macron
of France
said, we need a truce. Maybe he didn't want to say ceasefire, or truce, or armistice, or ceasefire. I think he even said ceasefire. The point is, they came and they oriented and they reaffirmed and they redirected the Americans, in particular President Trump, back toward a ceasefire. We'll see if they were totally effective, but there's some indication that message got through. This is to say, this is a long answer to your question, Colin. Did we make any progress over the last week? We lost some ground, I think, last Friday, gained some ground this past Monday, not least because we reoriented on the ceasefire, but we also made a lot of progress last Monday, or the past couple of days, on security guarantees.
That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. So, kind of at the center of the conversation around potential peace negotiations are security guarantees for Ukraine. And I know, there have been conversations about, okay, well, should Ukraine be allowed to join NATO, or should there be other sorts of security guarantees of Western support? Putin recently rejected any sort of Western peacekeeping troops in Ukraine to try to deter Russia from future attacks. He even had his foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, even suggested that Russians should be involved in the discussion of any sort of security guarantee for Ukraine. One, how big of a deal is this? And two, should the U.S. and the Europeans categorically reject any such security guarantee negotiation that involves the Russians? It would seem to me that would be incredibly perverse. Why would you, why would you let the person who has penetrated your country decide, whether you're going to actually have a security guarantee or not?
So we'll come back. You're exactly right. A lot of issues right there. One, NATO, if not NATO, then what security guarantee, and what role should the Russians play? The Russians should play no role.
Yeah.
Exactly what you said. I mean, the security guarantee, the security force, the reassurance force or deterrent force, or whatever we would call it, the coalition of the willing, which we can talk about, these 30 nations led by the Brits and the French are seriously considering putting troops on the ground. That's a deterrent force. And it's to deter Russia from invading again.
Yeah.
You're exactly right. Do you ask the Russians if they want a deterrent force in there to deter them? No, of course not. It's silly.
Yeah.
It's not serious. Whatever Lavrov says, don't take Lavrov seriously. Don't take him seriously. So of course you don't ask the Russians if they agree or approve or allow the Ukrainians to worry about and they take measures in furtherance of their own security. This is an issue between the Ukrainians and the Europeans and the Americans, and the Russians have no say. Let me go back to your question though about NATO. I mean, the best security guarantee is Ukrainian membership in NATO. It's the most credible. It's the most effective. It's probably the cheapest of all these security guarantees that we can talk about. And most European members of NATO support it now. And we used to. Americans used to. When I was in Ukraine in 2008, there was a summit in Bucharest, and George W. Bush, who sent me out there, came to Kyiv on his way to Bucharest, to the summit in Bucharest, where there on the agenda was a membership action plan for Ukraine and Georgia. And George W. Bush wanted to get Ukraine into NATO. And he came to Kyiv to make the case when he got to Bucharest. And at that time, then, the Germans and the French said no. They said no. Interesting question. Had they said yes, had Bush succeeded in getting, would Russia have invaded first Georgia and then Ukraine in 2014 and 2022? Exactly. Thousands of people would not be dead today if that had happened. So, but my point is, NATO is the security guarantee, is the gold standard security guarantee. Okay, it doesn't appear to be happening right away. It was not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen next year. I think it will happen. I think it will happen at some point. And the Ukrainians are continue to push for that as well. It's in their constitution. EU and NATO membership is in their constitution at this point.
Wow.
So, however, it's not going to happen in the next couple of years. So what to do instead? And then we get to this coalition of the willing, 30 nations, Britain, France leading, that are willing to put troops on the ground. The Americans, this is another thing that happened over the last week, that is 2 days ago, Monday, and yesterday. The Americans are now involved, committed, going to participate. Air power, air defense, bombers, conceivably, transportation. So this could be, a coalition of the willing, could be a credible security guarantee for the Ukrainians. Again, Russians don't get a say.
Well, security guarantees are not the only way that Russia is trying to influence negotiations around, a potential peace deal. We have also seen them continue to make maximalist demands to end this war, which would involve Ukraine handing over significant parts of the country in the east, like the Donbas region, as well as in Zaporizhia and the Kherson regions. Can you tell our listeners, why are these areas important? And do you think Putin's demands, really are a non-starter for Ukraine?
Non-starter, total non-starter.
Why is that?
So the Russians have been trying to break through in Donbas, in this exact area that we're talking about here, for 2 years. Since they tried to take Kyiv on the first, right when in February of 2022, and they failed. And the Ukrainians put up this incredible defense and pushed them all the way back. Well, they pushed them all the way back into where they are now, occupying 19% of Ukraine, and that area that they are pushed back into now we call Donbas and Crimea, and there's also part of Kherson, Zaporizhia, and it's not all of Donbas that they occupy. The Russians occupy. The Russians occupy most of Luhansk, and probably 60% of Donetsk.
Mm-hmm.
There are 3 or 4 strategic cities that are defensive fortresses in unoccupied Ukraine, in normal Ukraine, in Donbas, in Donetsk, in the Donetsk Oblast, that the Russians don't occupy, and that the Ukrainians have been defending since 2014. They've been defending this area, and they've built up forces, barriers. They've got defenses there that have been successfully holding off the Russians since 2014, for 11 years, but in particular intensively for the past 2 years. And they're again, it's a little bit of high ground. It's well defended, and the Russians have been trying, losing incredible numbers of Russian soldiers. And so now the proposal that you just mentioned, Putin comes in and says, "We want Ukraine to give us that territory." It's crazy. It's nonsense. It's a non-starter, exactly what you said. It's nonsense. Ukrainians will not give up the high ground, will not give up the defensive capabilities that they've built up. For what? For free? For just give it over? No. So I think that is a non-starter.
Well, you talked about the potential coalition of the willing. If the kind of land recognition that Vladimir Putin prefers is not the pathway, the key to unlock a pathway to peace. Trump has said that he's sort of set up meetings between Zelensky and Putin, but Moscow has thus far really downplayed that prospect. Do you think that we may see a Putin-Zelensky meeting at some point? And, what would you expect to come out of that?
I would hope to see it. I don't expect to see it.
Really?
No. Putin, we've talked about what his goal is. His goal is not peace. It's not a ceasefire. Is not an agreement. His goal is to drag it out as long as he can so that he can continue to batter Ukraine until he thinks Ukraine will submit and the Europeans will stop supporting and the Americans will stop supporting.
Then why do you hope that you would see that conversation?
Because it would be an indication that Putin realizes he can't win.
Mm-hmm.
That's what has to happen. He has to realize he cannot win. So President Trump, again, I'll go back to the same point. He's got leverage. President Trump can put pressure on Putin to come to the table. That's the table.
Yeah.
And maybe President Trump's at the table or maybe not. But the table is between Putin and Zelensky. And Putin needs to come there, and he needs to come there recognizing he cannot win, and that if he continues to try, he's going to be... Lindsey Graham yesterday talked about crushing the Russian economy. He's talking about crushing the Russian economy. And he's got a bill in for 500% tariffs on India and China for buying Russian oil. The point is we have leverage. If we can use to get Putin to the table, then that's why I say I hope it comes. I don't expect to see him come because I think Putin is intent on continuing to pound Ukraine.
Well, speaking of Senator Graham, he does have that bill in the Senate. There are more than 80 supporters.
85, I hear.
There are 85 supporters.
85% of the Senate is in favor of sanctioning Russia and supporting Ukraine. That's a strong message.
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. Senate all agreeing, 85% of senators agreeing on anything is a rare occurrence these days.
Putin should take note of that 85%. Trump has strong backing. Political backing, not just from the Senate, by the way. I mean, when you ask the American people, they do the same thing.
Yeah.
They support Ukraine. They oppose Putin.
So then, Ambassador, what is going on? Why has this bill that has 85% support in the Senate, seemingly, if you were to take those numbers, and apply them to the House, you would at least be able to get a simple majority support in the House. Why has that bill not been sent to President Trump's desk? Should we expect that it will be? And how do you think that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of this conflict?
So why has it been? Because Senator Graham and Senator Blumenthal, who's the Democratic co-sponsor, and the majority leader have said, okay, we're going to give President Trump time to do what he says he's going to do, what he said he was going to do. Again, this is before Anchorage. But leading up to Anchorage, President Trump was saying, I'm going to use the authorities. If Putin doesn't come to the table, President Trump does have the authorities to do this. He doesn't need that new bill from Graham and Blumenthal. He can do right now, put tariffs on.
He's showing us that he can do it against Canada.
Absolutely. He has. Now, there are questions about whether he can do that.
Fair.
But he has done it. He has done it. He could do it. Now, maybe get challenged and hold that, but that's not the point. The point is he doesn't need that Graham bill to do this. The Graham bill is a strong message that says do it. And President Trump was saying the right things for a while up until Anchorage, saying, I'm going to push Putin to come to the table, and if he doesn't agree to a ceasefire, then I'm going to put these sanctions on. So the Republican leadership has given him time to do that. Maybe they're going to reconsider.
Yeah, I mean, to me, these things do not seem in conflict with one another. These would seem to me to be tactics and strategy, that are complementary, not actually in conflict. If trying to bring peace to Ukraine and bring this conflict to an end was actually your goal. So it seems very bizarre to me that the Senate Majority Leader is kind of slow walking this seemingly, and also given the fact that we have seen time and time again this president has sought to undermine Ukraine. I don't have to remind our listeners. I'm sure they remember it in their own heads. Zelensky coming to the White House earlier this year, sitting in the Oval Office, being berated by the president and the vice president. And so for me, it's like I'm not understanding why the Senate Majority Leader and the senators want to give this president kind of more leeway in order to advance these negotiations when they've thus far been unsuccessful, as well as, we have seen that the administration has kind of continually undermined Ukraine throughout this conflict. So final question for you. How do you think this war actually ends? And what is your message to the Americans listening to our conversation who want to support our friends and allies in Ukraine? Is there more we, the public, can or should be doing to demonstrate our commitment to the people of Ukraine?
So, Colin, two questions. How does it end and how can we support? So how does it end? No one, of course, knows, but what we could kind of see a way forward. It's not satisfying. But it has to do with some of the things we've talked about. That is, first, a ceasefire. There needs to be a ceasefire. And President Trump has talked about stopping the killing. That's been his motivation all along. I want to stop the killing. He said that in the campaign all the way along. A ceasefire stops the killing. That should be what we're focused on. And again, the Europeans seem to have gotten Trump back on that message. We'll see. I hope that's the case. Stop the killing, ceasefire. Then there can be this coalition of the willing, this reassurance force, this deterrent force that's deployed into Ukraine to provide security to the Ukrainians so that they can get on about the business of governing, of living, of developing, of growing. If there is a ceasefire and if there is security, then the Ukrainians can start thinking about elections. They can start thinking about freedom of the press. During wartime, you don't have freedom of the press. At least not. You don't have unfettered freedom of the press, and they can get that back. And they can political campaigns, political conversations. They can get back to kind of a normal society if they've got a ceasefire and if they've got enforced ceasefire. Some way to enforce that. And the Ukrainians can get back on working on getting into the EU. And I would say get back working to get into NATO. They can do that. And they can get to where they grow. They've got a lot of potential. They are now among the world's best defense industrial bases, in particular on drones, but not just on drones. They have capabilities there for manufacturing that has grown immediately, just over the last 2 or 3 years. Wow. That is world class. So they can make it. They just need a ceasefire and need security on that. So that's the direction, and they can then sit down with the bloody Russians if they want to have this conversation about borders, or if the Russians want to talk about sanctions. If the Russians want to talk about sanctions, they're not really talking to the Ukrainians, but the Ukrainians would like to talk about accountability.
Sure.
The Ukrainians want to talk about who's responsible for this war, and who's going to pay for the damage. So there are things to be discussed, but after a ceasefire is in place, and then have these conversations, they'll go on forever. They will go on forever. There's not going to be an end to that until there's a new government in the Kremlin. Yeah. But we can have those conversations. They can ask for relief from sanctions. Chances are, my recommendation, we don't relieve sanctions. Even if there's a ceasefire, don't relieve sanctions until they're out of Ukraine, or until the Ukrainians are satisfied. But all that conversation can go ahead, but they need a ceasefire.
That's got to be the precondition.
And you asked about what can Americans do?
Yeah, what can Americans do?
Americans, first of all, can let their voices be heard. Let their congressmen and their senators, but not just that. I mean, I've had many conversations around this country, and people are really interested. And local governments, local governors, and local representatives and state legislatures are interested in this, and they should be, as they should be. So get involved at the local level. Get involved. Let your senators and congressmen know this is important. And there are easy ways to provide support to the Ukrainians. There's a very good website it's called a mechanism, and it is on a website. It's called United 24. You just Google United 24, and you'll go straight into it. And you can be sure that your money, your support, is going without worry about being diverted. Goes to the government of Ukraine. You can choose if you want to do humanitarian, if you want to do rehabilitation for veterans. You can do if you want to support drones. You can do that.
Wow.
Yeah. You got your choice on how you want to support. Gives you a lot of options. United 24, Google it and go there.
We'll have to check it out. Ambassador Bill Taylor, thanks so much for joining us on The 10.
Thank you, Colin.
All right, folks, that's going to do it for us. Please go back and check out previous episodes. Here to break down things that have been happening outside of the Russia-Ukrainian war is our supervising producer, Kelly McCoy.
I'm happy to be a ray of sunshine at the end of a otherwise important but perhaps a little cloudy conversation, Colin.
Yeah, well, it wasn't cloudy everywhere. I just got back from a much-needed vacation. I was in Las Vegas. Viva Las Vegas, baby, the last few days. And as you could probably tell, I'm a little sun-kissed.
You are glowing, Colin.
I'm glowing.
How was...
Perhaps a little bit too much,
yeah.
But...
how was your trip? We were... I am...
You were placing bets? No.
Well, I was really happy that you got some time away. Let's just put it that way.
Thank you. It was lovely. I ate so many good meals while I was out there. I figured out how to game the system on overcoming Las Vegas. Like, coffee prices are insane. You stay at a resort and they charge you 3 times as much. So I was like, I have to use all my Starbucks stars while I'm in Las Vegas.
You don't have to pay
$8
$20
for an iced coffee, $9 for an iced coffee. 100 stars here, 100 stars there, and you know what? I just saved myself $20. So
look at you.
Yeah, I know.
Gotta spend to save, right?
That's right. Speaking of spending, I also spent one night at, as well as a little bit of money, getting tickets to the Backstreet Boys.
They're back.
Backstreet's back, baby. And they are playing for a limited time at the Sphere in Las Vegas, which is just an unbelievable venue. We were on the floor. We had kind of general admission tickets, and it was probably I was probably 15 feet from the front of the stage. So they're looking right at us, pointing to us, whatever. It was so cool. They actually did a fantastic job. So I saw them. This is very weird. I'm not the biggest Backstreet Boys fan, but I saw them probably 8-9 years ago or so, also in Las Vegas. And this was they were playing at Planet Hollywood, and the concert was fun. It was good, but it wasn't the memorable experience like it was at the Sphere. And I can't put into words what it is like. You are basically, you feel like you're in the show, you're in one of their music videos, or you're in a video game is almost kind of what it feels like. Yeah. And my other big takeaway from this concert is growing up, it was all about Nick Carter, Brian Luttrell, whatever. No, AJ is by far the best Backstreet Boy, and they completely covered him up back in the 90s, as AJ reminded me at the concert back in 1993 when they launched. So
the year our Lord.
Yeah, I did not need a reminder about the Backstreet Boys having been in my life for over 3 decades.
And how old that makes you.
Yes, yes. But all in all, great trip, great experience, had a lot of fun.
So I was going to ask, do you feel like you could see a concert in any other venue after being in the Sphere? Because I've heard the technology is so crazy. And the answer is you don't have to, because when Taylor Swift has her residency in Vegas, as many of the Swiftie conspiracy theorists, perhaps such as myself, think she may unveil as her next era, you too can return and live it all over again.
Well, we will see. That would be amazing. I would be quite fearful of having general admission ticket and being on the floor, like where there are no seats, because the Swifties are terrifying, and I feel like would absolutely rush the stage. So for my safety, I do have a child I need to go home to. For my safety, I'm not sure that
you'll get seated tickets.
Yes, that is correct.
Yes. Have you kept up with the latest little Easter eggs that she's been dropping us while you've been gone?
So I did see that she had an announcement the other day. I didn't quite understand what it was. I was admittedly laying at the pool trying to...
That's good for you.
Just block everything out. And
you didn't miss much.
Really?
It was, she unveiled her, I believe it's Shiny Bug vinyl. And I gotta say, like, Taylor, Tree, we love you, but we also have lives to lead. And as someone that can have a fairly busy day, I can't block off the hours and hours and hours I spent texting everybody and counting down for what ended up being a vinyl release and not the single that I thought I was going to be.
Well, speaking of that single, I know that I think it's August 30th is the deadline by which for the Grammys, artists have to release their music so it can be considered for nomination. So maybe we will get that single, in the next 10 days. Maybe we won't. But I know you, Kelly McCoy, our traveling Taylor Swift correspondent for the tent, will be keeping a close eye on this for us, and I'm sure will be keeping us posted in the weeks ahead.
Listen, as I know anything, you will hear it here first. So our listeners can look forward to a lot of my appearances now that Taylor Swift is back in our lives.
Yes, give the people what they want. And with that, that's going to do it for us this week. Please go back and check out previous episodes. If you are like me, you are counting down the days until football season starts in just another week and a half or so. So dust off those appetizer recipes. Have a great end to the summer. I know we're just about to go into Labor Day in a few week and a half, and we'll talk to you next week.
Go Commanders.
The Tent is a podcast from the Center for American Progress Action Fund. It's hosted by me, Colin Seaberger. Muggs Leone is our digital producer. Kelly McCoy is our supervising producer. Mishka Espy is our booking producer. Haifan, Olivia Mowry, and Tony Pandolfo are our video team. You can find us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.